Why do brothers and sisters, who once spent endless hours playing together, laughing together, even fighting together, suddenly grow into adults who barely speak? Why do conversations that once flowed naturally now feel strained, awkward, or even non-existent? This painful truth haunts many families. Blood alone is not enough to sustain a relationship. Consider this startling reality. Studies suggest that nearly 40% of adults report feeling distant from at least one sibling, and for many, that distance only deepens with time. In childhood, siblings are often our first friends, our allies in a confusing world. We share bedrooms, toys, secrets, even fears. We conspire against parental authority, comfort each other during thunderstorms, and navigate the mysterious landscape of growing up together. These early bonds feel unbreakable, forged in the crucible of shared experience and innocent love. But adulthood changes everything. Responsibilities, personal choices, unresolved conflicts, and the weight of family history quietly erode even the strongest bonds. The magic of childhood fades, replaced by mortgages, demanding careers, romantic partnerships, and the relentless march of time. What once felt permanent begins to feel fragile. And this isn't just about family drama, it's about human psychology at its deepest level. The forces that pull siblings apart operate beneath consciousness, working like invisible currents that gradually alter the landscape of our most fundamental relationships. Fyodor Dostoevsky, who explored the darkest and brightest corners of the human soul, once wrote, "The greatest challenge is not to love someone, but to truly understand them. When that understanding fades, even those tied by blood can become strangers." Carl Jung, the pioneering psychologist, observed that family relationships often carry the heaviest psychological burden precisely because they're supposed to be the safest. When they're not, the disappointment cuts deeper than any other betrayal. In this exploration, we're going to uncover 7 powerful and often overlooked reasons why siblings grow apart as they get older, and how these hidden forces silently shape whether we stay connected or drift away. These aren't simple explanations or quick fixes. They're complex psychological truths that require courage to face and wisdom to understand. So stay with me, because by the end, you may look at your own family with new eyes and perhaps find a path back to connections you thought were lost forever. We assume siblings grow up with the same childhood. After all, they lived in the same house, had the same parents, and shared the same rules. But here's the truth that therapists and psychologists have long understood. There is no single childhood story. Each child experiences the family through their own unique lens, shaped by factors as subtle as birth order, temperament, and even the family's circumstances during different periods. Childhood is not a single narrative. It's a collection of individual perceptions, each as real and valid as the others. 2 siblings can live under the same roof and still remember entirely different worlds. One may recall laughter, warmth, and encouragement, remembering Sunday morning pancakes and bedtime stories read with loving voices. The other may remember strict rules, criticism, or feeling invisible, recalling the same pancakes as rushed obligations and the same stories as distractions from parental exhaustion. It's not that one is wrong and the other is right. It's because memory is shaped by personality, sensitivity, birth order, and the specific developmental needs each child had at different moments. A father's scolding might motivate one child toward excellence, but deeply wound another who needed gentleness to thrive. A mother's praise may lift one sibling's confidence while making another feel unseen because their different achievements went unnoticed. The middle child may remember feeling lost in the shuffle, while the youngest recalls being coddled, and the oldest remembers the weight of expectations that the others never felt. These aren't just different perspectives, they're entirely different emotional realities, each one profoundly real to the person who lived it. And here's where the real tension begins. When siblings revisit their childhood, those clashing memories collide like tectonic plates. A brother says, "You're exaggerating, that never happened." A sister replies, "You just don't get it." But beneath these words lies something far more painful. These statements don't just deny the event, they invalidate the emotions tied to it, dismissing years of pain or joy as if they were fabrications. When someone tells you your memories are wrong, they're not just challenging facts, they're challenging your reality, your emotional truth, your very sense of self. And that creates silence, because who wants to fight for their right to their own experience? Do you and your siblings remember childhood differently? The answer is almost certainly yes, and that's not a failure, it's the human condition. The key insight here is this: each sibling's memory is only a fragment of the truth, but each fragment contains real pain, real joy, real longing. If we can accept that multiplicity, if we can hold space for different truths to coexist, we prevent those old wounds from becoming walls. The alternative is what we see in too many families: siblings who speak different emotional languages, each convinced the other is lying or delusional, when in reality they're both telling their version of a truth too complex for any single perspective to contain. Sibling rivalry doesn't disappear when childhood ends. It simply changes shape, becoming more sophisticated and often more devastating in its adult form. What began as fights over toys or parental attention evolves into a subtle but lifelong competition for recognition, success, and validation. The stakes get higher, but the game never ends. Who is more successful? Who has the family? Who took better care of mom and dad? Who made the right choices? These questions haunt adult siblings, often without them even realizing it. The comparisons may never be spoken out loud, but they're felt in every family gathering, every phone call, every social media post. When one sibling gets promoted, buys a house, or receives recognition, the other might feel genuinely happy, but also secretly diminished. It's not malicious, it's human nature, hardwired from our earliest days when parental attention truly was a matter of survival. And when love starts to feel like a scoreboard, the relationship suffers in ways that are hard to articulate, but impossible to ignore. Instead of celebrating each other, siblings quietly measure who is ahead and who is behind. Every achievement of one becomes a reminder of the other's shortcomings, every success a subtle indictment of the other's failures. The sister who chose career over family watches her brother's children play and wonders if she made the wrong choice. The brother who prioritized stability over dreams listens to his sister's adventures and feels a stab of envy mixed with disapproval. Neither admits these feelings because they're ashamed of them, but the feelings persist, creating an invisible tension that colors every interaction. This invisible competition is exhausting, and it slowly erodes affection, replacing genuine care with performance and authentic connection with careful positioning. The hard truth: not all siblings escape this trap. Some reach the emotional maturity to realize that another's success does not diminish their own, that love is not a finite resource, that there's room for everyone to thrive. But for many, rivalry becomes one of the most powerful forces driving them apart. The tragedy is that this competition often continues even when there's no prize to win, no parent left to impress, no external validation to achieve. It becomes a habit of the heart, a way of relating that persists long after its usefulness has expired. Did you ever feel like you were being compared to your sibling either by your parents or by yourself? The comparison trap is one of the most insidious aspects of family dynamics because it turns natural differences into sources of shame and distance. As children, you're on the same team. You share routines, schools, bedrooms, and holidays. You have the same curfew, eat the same meals, follow the same rules. There's a beautiful simplicity to childhood relationships. They exist within the same framework, guided by the same authorities, moving toward the same basic goals. But adulthood forces choices, and those choices often create distance in ways that are both inevitable and heartbreaking. One sibling may embrace traditional roles: marriage, children, a steady career, a mortgage in the suburbs. Another may chase independence, adventure, or non-traditional paths, remaining single by choice, traveling the world, pursuing artistic dreams, choosing careers that prioritize meaning over money. At first, these differences seem harmless. even interesting. Family dinners become opportunities to hear about different worlds, different approaches to life. But over time, these lifestyle differences can transform from curiosities into sources of quiet judgment and mutual incomprehension. The one who chose stability may begin to view the other's choices through a lens of irresponsibility. When are you going to settle down and get serious about life? The one who chose freedom may see the other's conventional path as a betrayal of dreams and potential. How can you be satisfied with such an ordinary life? These judgments often remain unspoken, but they build invisible walls between people who once shared everything. The gap widens not just in lifestyle, but in values, priorities, and worldviews. The sibling with children can't understand how someone could choose not to experience parenthood. The childless sibling can't fathom how someone could willingly surrender their independence. The financially successful sibling wonders why the other doesn't want more security. The one who chose passion over profit questions how anyone could spend their life in a job they don't love. Neither is wrong, but neither can fully grasp the other's reality anymore. We often expect our siblings to grow alongside us, to evolve in complementary directions, to share the same values forever. When they don't, it feels like betrayal even though it isn't. It's growth, it's individuation, it's the natural process of becoming who we're meant to be. But that knowledge doesn't make the distance any less painful. The test of real sibling love is this: can you accept their choices, even when they look nothing like your own? Can you celebrate their version of success, even when it wouldn't fulfill you? Can you respect their path even when you can't imagine walking it yourself? Without this acceptance, distance grows, not from hate, but from the exhaustion of constantly feeling judged, misunderstood, or required to defend choices that feel fundamental to who you are. The sadness is that both siblings often love each other deeply, but no longer know how to bridge the gap between their different worlds. Every family has an invisible record book, a ledger of fairness that each member keeps in their heart, though none would admit to its existence. Who was the favorite? Who was praised more? Who carried more of the burden? Who got more opportunities, more forgiveness, more understanding? These questions burn in the consciousness of many adult siblings, often decades after the perceived injustices occurred. One sibling might always feel overshadowed, carrying memories of achievements that went uncelebrated, while their brother or sister's smaller accomplishments were met with fanfare. Another might feel the weight of having been the responsible one, the child who was expected to set an example, to help with younger siblings, to be mature beyond their years while others were allowed to simply be children. These roles, assigned in childhood, often become lifelong burdens. The successful sibling may carry the pressure of constant performance, never feeling allowed to fail or struggle. The artistic sibling may feel their practical achievements are never taken seriously. The difficult sibling may find that every mistake reinforces an old narrative they can never escape. One may have carried heavy responsibilities caring for younger siblings, helping with chores, translating for immigrant parents, or supporting aging grandparents, while another had the freedom to focus on school, friends, and personal development. These different childhood experiences create vastly different relationships with responsibility, sacrifice, and entitlement. The burden-carrying sibling often feels resentful that their sacrifices went unacknowledged, while their siblings' freedoms were taken for granted. The protected sibling may be genuinely unaware of the inequities, having lived in a different family reality altogether. These small inequalities, repeated year after year, accumulate like compound interest, leaving deep scars that shape adult relationships in profound ways. And those scars quietly drive siblings apart, creating emotional distance that's hard to explain to outsiders who see only surface interactions. It's not always about money or inheritance, though financial inequities can certainly play a role. More often, it's about feeling seen, valued, and treated fairly in the fundamental ways that shape our sense of self-worth. A sibling who feels overlooked or underappreciated may wait decades for an acknowledgement that never comes, for an apology that's never offered, for a recognition of their sacrifices that seems so obvious to them but invisible to others. The pain isn't just about what happened, it's about what continues to happen when those experiences are dismissed, minimized, or forgotten by the very people who should remember and care most. And when that recognition never arrives, bitterness replaces closeness. The conversations become polite but hollow, the warmth disappears behind a facade of family obligation, and the relationship becomes a performance rather than a connection. The tragedy is that often both siblings are waiting for acknowledgement from the other, both feeling unappreciated, both nursing wounds that the other may not even know exist. Here's a hard truth that challenges our romantic notions of family loyalty. Sometimes siblings don't drift apart because of hate, cruelty, or dramatic betrayals. Sometimes they drift apart because staying close feels too painful, too triggering, too reminiscent of wounds that have never properly healed. As adults, we gradually learn that we have the power to choose which relationships to nurture and which to let fade, and this realization can be both liberating and devastating when it comes to family. For some people, distance from a sibling is not cruelty, it's survival, not coldness but self-preservation in its purest form. Consider the adult who grew up constantly criticized by a sibling who seemed to delight in pointing out flaws, mistakes, and shortcomings. Or the person whose achievements were always minimized by a brother or sister who couldn't celebrate anyone else's success. Or someone who learned early that their emotional needs would always come second to their siblings' more dramatic demands for attention. These patterns, established in childhood, often persist into adulthood with devastating effects. If every interaction with a sibling reopens old wounds, revives patterns of criticism, or replays unresolved conflicts, distance can feel like the only path to peace and personal growth. The family gatherings become minefields where old triggers await. The phone calls become exercises in walking on eggshells. The very presence of the sibling becomes a reminder of a version of yourself that you've worked hard to heal and move beyond. This independence from toxic family dynamics is often misunderstood by outsiders who have never experienced it. They see coldness where there is actually courage. They interpret boundaries as meanness when they're actually acts of self-love. They mistake healing for hatred. But in reality, choosing distance is often the most difficult decision someone can make, because it goes against everything we're taught about family loyalty and unconditional love. Sometimes walking away isn't about not loving your sibling, it's about finally learning to love yourself enough to protect your mental health, your self-esteem, and your hard-won emotional progress. It's about refusing to continue playing roles that never fit, accepting criticisms that aren't constructive, or enabling patterns that harm both parties. The person who chooses distance often grieves the loss of the relationship they wish they could have had, while protecting the person they've fought to become. This choice requires immense strength because it means accepting that some relationships, no matter how much we might want them to work, are simply too damaged or incompatible to maintain without sacrificing our own well-being. From childhood, we're told, your siblings will always be there for you. This message comes from parents, grandparents, movies, and cultural mythology that portrays sibling bonds as unbreakable safety nets. We internalize the belief that blood creates automatic loyalty, that family means unconditional support, that siblings are permanent fixtures who will show up for every birthday, every wedding, every funeral, every crisis without question or hesitation. Birthdays, weddings, funerals, crises, we expect unwavering loyalty, immediate availability, and instinctive understanding. But reality is far more complicated than these idealized expectations allow. Siblings have their own battles, limitations, and fears. They have demanding jobs, struggling marriages, health problems, financial stress, and their own emotional wounds that may make them unavailable exactly when we need them most. They may be dealing with depression, addiction, relationship problems, or career crises that consume all their emotional bandwidth. They may live across the country or across the world, making physical presence impossible. They may have different communication styles, different ways of showing love, or different ideas about what family obligations mean, and when those expectations are unmet, a forgotten birthday call, absence during a crisis, failure to offer support during a difficult time, it feels like betrayal rather than simple human limitation. What hurts most isn't just the absence itself, but the shattering of our illusions about who we thought they were and what we believed the relationship meant. We had constructed an identity around being someone whose sibling would always be there, and when they're not, it forces us to question not just their loyalty, but our own worth. Over time, these unmet expectations create bitterness and resentment that can poison even positive interactions. We stop reaching out, convinced the other doesn't care enough to prioritize the relationship. We interpret their busy life as proof of our unimportance rather than evidence of their human limitations. Meanwhile, both sides often silently feel hurt and misunderstood, each believing they've been more giving, more available, more loving than the other. Each person keeps their own scorecard of slights and disappointments, building cases against each other that are never directly addressed. The sibling who missed the birthday call may have been dealing with a work crisis they couldn't share. The one who seemed absent during the family emergency may have been struggling with their own breakdown. But without communication, these explanations never surface, and assumptions fill the gaps with the worst possible interpretations. Releasing these expectations doesn't mean lowering your standards for love or accepting poor treatment. It means accepting siblings as humans, imperfect, flawed, struggling, and carrying their own invisible burdens that may make them less available than we wish they were. It means recognizing that love doesn't always look like immediate response, constant availability, or mind-reading abilities. Sometimes it looks like showing up imperfectly, caring from a distance, or doing their best within the constraints of their own complicated lives. Sometimes the reason isn't rivalry, injustice, or conflict. Sometimes it's simply time, that most relentless and democratic force that touches every relationship but seems to affect family bonds in particularly subtle ways. Unlike friendships, which we consciously choose to maintain, or romantic relationships, which demand regular attention, sibling relationships often exist in a category we assume will maintain itself. We take them for granted in ways we would never take other relationships for granted. Life sweeps us up in its relentless current. Careers demand more hours, romantic partners require emotional investment, children need constant attention, bills require working longer, health problems demand focus, and the accumulation of adult responsibilities creates a tunnel vision that leaves little room for anything that isn't immediately urgent. We tell ourselves, "I'll call tomorrow, we'll visit next year, once things settle down, we'll reconnect." These aren't lies, they're genuine intentions made by people who care, but who have been overwhelmed by the complexity of adult life. But tomorrow turns into next year, and next year turns into a decade of good intentions that never materialized. The calls become birthday obligations, the visits become holiday requirements, and gradually the relationship atrophies from neglect rather than deliberate harm. What makes time's erosion particularly painful is that it's so easy to rationalize. There was no fight to resolve, no betrayal to forgive, no dramatic moment that marked the end of closeness. There's just the slow, almost invisible drift that happens when two people stop actively choosing each other, stop making the effort to stay current in each other's lives, stop prioritizing connection over convenience. The tragedy is that the love often still exists, buried under layers of business, good intentions, and accumulated awkwardness. It just gets suffocated by neglect, like a plant that dies not from poison but from lack of water. And when we finally notice, usually prompted by a crisis, an illness, or a death, we realize that we've become strangers to people who once knew us better than anyone. We discover that we don't know their current struggles, their hopes, their fears, or even the basic facts of their daily lives. Years have passed without meaningful conversation, and the gap feels too wide to bridge. The effort required to rebuild connection can feel overwhelming, and the fear of awkwardness can be paralyzing. So we continue the pattern, promising ourselves we'll reach out soon while secretly hoping they'll make the first move. Time is merciless in its democracy. It affects everyone equally, but not everyone responds to its pressure with the same choices. Some people fight against time's erosive power, deliberately scheduling calls, planning visits, and treating sibling relationships as priorities that require active maintenance. Others succumb to time's subtle pressure, allowing the relationship to fade into a collection of childhood memories and holiday card exchanges. Without intentional effort, without conscious choice to resist time's pull, siblings who once shared everything become nothing more than names in an old photo album, faces in family pictures that prompt bittersweet nostalgia, but no current connection. The phone numbers remain in our contacts, but we can't remember the last real conversation. We know where they live, but we haven't visited in years. We care about them in the abstract, but we don't really know who they are anymore. Sibling bonds are some of the most complex human relationships we navigate, containing within them the capacity for profound love and devastating pain, sometimes simultaneously. They carry the weight of our earliest experiences, our deepest insecurities, and our most fundamental beliefs about what love looks like and what family means. Unlike friendships, which we choose as adults with our mature judgment, or romantic partnerships, which we enter with some awareness of compatibility, sibling relationships are assigned to us by biology and circumstance, creating connections that may or may not align with who we become as individuals. The complexity deepens because these relationships exist in a strange temporal space where past and present continuously collide. We may be successful adults in our professional lives, confident and capable, but in the presence of our siblings, we can instantly revert to childhood roles and insecurities. The successful lawyer becomes the middle child who always felt overlooked. The acclaimed artist becomes the youngest who was never taken seriously. The devoted parent becomes the eldest who carried too much responsibility too early. These regressions happen unconsciously and can be jarring for everyone involved. Blood alone does not sustain these connections any more than soil alone sustains a garden. What keeps sibling relationships alive and thriving is compassion, the ability to see each other's pain and respond with kindness rather than judgment. It requires effort, the conscious choice to stay curious about who your sibling is becoming rather than insisting they remain who they were in childhood. And perhaps most challenging of all, it demands the willingness to accept one another as imperfect but valuable companions on life's journey, people who may make choices we don't understand, hold values we don't share, and live lives we wouldn't choose for ourselves, but who remain worthy of love and respect because of their fundamental humanity, not because of their proximity to our own preferences. The point of understanding these psychological forces is not to assign blame or justify permanent estrangement. It's not to excuse harmful behavior or suggest that all sibling relationships should be preserved regardless of their cost to our well-being. Rather, it's to recognize the invisible currents that shape these connections so we can choose our responses more consciously rather than simply reacting from old wounds and unconscious patterns. Because once you see these forces clearly, once you understand the difference between childhood memory and objective truth, between healthy competition and destructive comparison, between reasonable expectations and impossible demands, you can choose differently. You can choose to reach out despite awkwardness, to forgive despite imperfect apologies, to love despite differences, or to create healthy distance despite social pressure to maintain connection at all costs. The power lies in conscious choice rather than unconscious reaction. So let me ask you this: which of these reasons resonates most with your life? Have you drifted apart from a sibling, or maybe reconnected after years of silence? Have you found yourself trapped in old patterns, or have you managed to create a new kind of relationship that honors both your shared history and your individual growth? The stories of sibling relationships are as varied as the people who live them, and each one offers lessons about the complexity of human connection. Share your story, because in our individual experiences lie universal truths about the challenge and possibility of loving people who knew us before we knew ourselves, who carry pieces of our history that no one else can understand, and who remain, despite everything, some of our most important teachers about what it means to be human in relationship with others. And if you found this exploration meaningful, remember that understanding these dynamics is just the beginning. The real work lies in how we choose to apply these insights to the relationships that matter most in our own lives.